UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka left the undefeated UNLV Rebels Tuesday night over claims of unfulfilled verbal NIL promises from a UNLV assistant coach. And the number that was thrown out is he was promised $100,000 as he was leaving Holy Cross to go to UNLV. They're undefeated. He's played well, and he decides that he's going to transfer and he's going to redshirt, leave UNLV. And we just had Ross Tucker on. Ross goes, he might be getting $500,000 to $1 million if he goes someplace else next season, which he obviously is going to. David Ubben, the national senior college football writer for The Athletic and host of Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast, joining us on the program. David, how did we get here? How do you summarize exactly what happened?
Well, do you want to go through 30 years of NCAA officials putting the line in the sand as the rest of the world and common sense crossed over and they refused to adopt common sense rules? And now you have an NIL landscape with not very many rules and not very many guidelines and no one protecting players, no one protecting programs. And situations like these are going to happen. I mean, this is very different from the Jaden Rashada saga for a number of reasons. But in spirit, it is similar in that you have a kid being promised a lot of money and not being delivered on that money. And the main reason is because of all of those factors at play in the landscape that make this sort of just a lawless place where people are trying to figure it out. And it's very hard to figure out, especially for, kids who are dealing with these situations for the first time ever. And it's only been happening for 3 years and only been happening as it is now for a couple of years. And it's hard to figure out.
Yeah, but okay, let's just apply logic. And I know that's rarely done.
Yeah, it's college sports. Easy.
So he's leaving Holy Cross. He's going to UNLV and says that he was promised $100,000 by an assistant coach. It's a verbal promise. Now you have to go to the collective to get that money. Like there's a disconnect between the coaching staff and the collective because the NCAA says, they can't, coexist here from the standpoint of having contact, which is silly. I don't think there's any way you recruit somebody and then say, I can't promise you anything. Go talk to the collective. What kid is going to transfer under that false pretense? So how do they prove or disprove the $100,000 offer from an assistant coach?
Well, you can. I mean, I guess there's not a lot of reason for a kid to lie. And if you looked at all the statements that came out yesterday, nobody seemed to be disputing this verbal agreement, but they're disputing that there's a written agreement that they can prove in court that they're going to owe this kid actually money. I don't think he's going to get paid at all. So it goes into this place where there's not a lot of norms, there's not a lot of rules, and so I think that it definitely seems to be true that the coach promised him money, and he wouldn't be the first coach to promise a kid money that they didn't have at the moment. But you get the kid, you think, well, we can get donors, we can get boosters excited, we can pay him on the back end, we can make this happen once we get them, and it seems clear based on them coming back to the coaching staff, coming back to the collective over and over since February when this deal was ironed out, that they didn't have the money to pay him. That seems clear at this point. And so that's a failure on the part of the entire sort of UNLV landscape. And it's an embarrassing saga. And this is the kind of stuff that really hurts you on the recruiting trail. Florida dealt with some of this as well. It's $13 million versus $100,000. But these are things that are going to be brought up on the recruiting trail, and it's tough for schools to deal with that. But it's an ugly situation, and it goes back to if you don't know that you have the money, maybe don't promise it. But $100,000 is not very much money. It seems to me that it's kind of hard to believe, even with all of the lack of support that has kind of plagued UNLV's program, that you can't come up with $100,000 for your starting quarterback in Vegas. I mean, you could probably go walk around the street and count, $10 bills in the cracks of the sidewalk and probably be able to come up with that. So it's hard to believe, but that seems to be the reality for the program right now.
Yeah, my college source said to me this morning, UNLV wanted to play the game. They couldn't afford to pay the game.
Yeah.
Therefore, hey, we want to be big time. And then they do this, in the same time frame of a $27 million payout to stay in the Mountain West, where this kid's trying to get $100,000 that you promised him. So what's the fallout? Like, where is college football going from here? I said that we're kind of teetering. we're teetering on the verge of something great with the playoffs, but we're also teetering on the verge of what direction are we really headed in with the total landscape of college football?
Well, it's something that makes a little bit more sense. This sort of perpetual free agency for everybody on every team every year is not good for the sport. It's not good for the kids. You have situations like these. This is a public situation, but you hear whispers of kids getting shorted, and they stick around because they're like, well, this is the only way I'm going to get paid is if I just stick around, and maybe if I'm good enough, they decide they're eventually going to pay me. You kind of hear stuff like that, but you don't see guys leaving teams over it very often. So ultimately, what I say with this is you can see in the court cases, you can see in a lot of the legislation that's kind of moving through, is that we're going to get towards something resembling employment, something resembling revenue sharing, where those $27 million checks that you're getting, that's not explicitly TV revenue, but it's basically TV revenue, and the players will get some portion of that. What that exactly looks like, what those percentages look like, I think is still certainly in flux. But when you have no rules and no contracts and anything like that, you have no control over player movement, and the courts have proven that over and over again. But if you get to something resembling employment and something resembling revenue sharing, then you can have contracts, and it makes it harder for kids to leave, and it's not exploitive to limit where guys can go. It's the same thing we see in pro sports. If Patrick Mahomes wants to go join the Patriots tomorrow, he can't do that because he's under contract and nobody complains because he's being paid well and he signed the contract, but you don't have that in college sports right now. So something close to that is coming to bring a little bit of common sense back to the roster management across the sport.
It's going to be a collective bargaining agreement here, David. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, that you're right, but the issue is that one, you have 85, it's going to be 105 scholarship guys on 134 FBS teams, and it's a transient workforce that's only going to be relevant in the sport usually 1 to 3 years. You're only playing the sport for 4 to 5 years. So that presents some challenges. And you talk to people that are kind of in the mix for trying to become the people that kind of help form this union. They say those challenges can be overcome, but you look at the NFL where you got 32 teams and 53-man roster. That's a much more manageable workforce, and they're going to be there for a little bit longer time. You have leaders, you have guys that are in the league that become faces and understand how these things work for 10 years. You don't have that in college. So in addition to your students at a university as well, which complicates all this as well. So I think ultimately you're right. You'll get to something resembling a collective bargaining agreement, but you have to have something resembling a players association that can collectively bargain on behalf of the players. And they're not going to all agree. And getting a consensus or what players want when that workforce is that big and that transient is a challenge.
Does the NCAA have a role in this? Are they playing? Oh, okay.
No, this is people in the sport. I think they figured it out a lot during COVID. That the conferences are meeting every day. They're saying, "Hey, what's going on at your campus? What can we do?" This is really when it was laid bare. I think everybody knew it, but during COVID, when they're trying to figure out how do we best serve our athletes, how do we figure out, can we get to a season? Can we get guys back on campus? The conferences are meeting every day. The leadership on the campuses are meeting every day. They go weeks, months without hearing from the NCAA. And I think you talk to people around the sport, like I said, everybody kind of knew the NCAA was MIA on dealing with big picture issues and trying to get to solutions. But when you have this gigantic pandemic that it disrupts everything, the absence there really kind of let schools and campuses figure out, like, oh, no, we got to figure this out ourselves.
David, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it.
David Ubben, the national senior college football writer for The Athletic, host of Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast.